Are here today. Study for an exam. What questions do we have?
You have on the
Maybe
document,
to actually use this.
what should designers consider determining what can be traded limits and stuff? You talk about like what it means to limit those things, but I rewatched the videos and I looked through the slides. But I couldn't find what people should think about when they're limiting those things.
So limiting, all right, my brain is already ADDing on me. Limiting what? Be sure.
Limiting what can be traded,
Trading,
how
yeah.
long things can be traded.
Yeah.
when it can be
So
traded.
we basically want to consider how free form should that trading be. So design options would include things like, do we want to assess a fee associated with any trading transaction? Should the game take a 0.5% cut, 2% cut, 5% cut, 100% cut? Obviously, those are the boundaries of that, but you have the ability now to make trading more or less desirable. What this does with the actual economic system is it will say you need to be able to profit by this much through this transaction to be able to make up for the fee that is associated with the transaction. So now you're less able to write a script that says, even if the profit is 0.00001%, list the item and try to sell it. Now you have to have enough overhead in that to be able to profit. So it drives the botting down because bots aren't as profitable or fewer things are profitable from that perspective. And it will reroute the value of those to the value of other aspects of your game. So that's one thing designers can do is do that. You can also limit the kinds of objects that can be traded or the quantity of items that are, how many trades can you make in a day? That also reduces botting, but says now, even if you have 1,000 potential trades, if you have 10 trades, that's the limit of what you can list at one time, you will prioritize those that will be most profitable to you, the player, which means that you're going to have a market that the market rate is determined. You're limiting the supply by saying only that's actually profitable is going to get. If that drives down the demand for really common items that don't have a ton of value associated with that trade, that'll find a market price that is higher than that, because people won't be trying to make listings for all of these low value items until there's a difference between their value and the value to actually get them that is large enough due to lack of supply that the price is up high enough for people to want to go farm the easy thing again. So it creates a nice equilibrium point that is higher for common items, and that gets redirected to lower for more expensive items because more people will want to spend their trade slots on those expensive items, which in general makes botting less valuable.
Is it gonna be like the last exam where there's more points than what we need to get 100%?
I usually try to bake that in where I can. I was able to do it, but not quite to that extent.
Okay.
So there are more than 100 points, but there are not 118 points on this one.
How many pages?
I haven't actually spaced it yet. I wrote the questions, but I don't actually know how many, what it comes out to be when it's spaced.
How many questions?
It's usual or questions with sub-questions, etc. So even a number there is not particularly.
How many of the big numbers?
I think there were seven big numbers.
I heard you say, but I missed it. How many points is it out of?
It is 105 total points this time, out of 100 still. Unless I go change that, because I just wrote it yesterday, but I was pretty happy with my point distribution. So it's likely to stay the same.
This was a really long study guide.
Yeah, it was actually really challenging to write the exam for it.
You went all the way to S on one of them.
Yeah, there were way more things that I could ask than I could reasonably find the time to, or the space to put it on an exam. So I tried to pick and choose what was a balance between what's relevant, what is applicable to more things, or in general, if it's applicable in more places, then I tried to incorporate it somehow. And then balanced between the importance of those sections. So since there are so many points, on the economic problems, there are probably more questions that target that. I didn't try to balance it on a chapter by chapter basis. I balanced it on a how much content was there and how important is that content basis.
For slide 15, question 3, it says, how do costers difference between PvP and PvE games? Be able to describe in English and chart. What does chart mean? Okay.
Yeah, so on the slides, I wanted to say that if you wanted to reproduce some of the written work there, where we know that a PvP game needs to be balanced such that the benefits and costs cancel each other out. Whereas in a PvE game, the value of something goes up at some rate. It could be linear, it could be polynomial, it could be exponential, but the value doesn't have to be canceled out by associated costs. So the value isn't targeting 0, it's targeting being on curve with some function above 0 that is meant to be a fun progression. So the next sword you find should be stronger than your current sword and not have an associated number of downsides to it to balance out the benefits that it gives you. Maybe it's just a higher attack, so it is strictly better. So the balance to that, yeah, it's about the progression of that number above 0 rather than keeping it at 0, being able to say any benefit should be weighed down by an associated amount of cost. So if you wanted to describe that visually, refer back to the slide with the diagram. That may help an argument and may keep you from having to write 4 sentences if you can just draw something out. Draw an arrow to it in a chart. It says, yes, this is the chart from class, but it helps me make my point. Faster, fewer words. Other questions?
I don't
If
know
people
if this was
remotely
in my mind,
have them as
but
well, I'm looking at chat.
It feels like one of the questions has the answer in the question, I
Yeah,
guess.
probably.
And I don't know what to, because I'm doing your method of going through and answering that question on the study guide.
Yeah,
And then I'm gonna use that as my notes. I just don't know what the answer for this question,
which one is it?
the one I asked you about.
Oh, yeah,
Just like, what should you consider? And then you list all the things that I would have written down to consider.
yeah. Yeah, that answers the question though, right? I'm trying to do that as if you come to me with the question, I'm trying to say, this is the kind of thing that I would be looking for. So here are some options of what I would throw on an exam off the top of my head for something like that. Is it exhaustive? I'm sure it is not. There are other things that you could absolutely think of and do to intervene.
So which one are you asking about then?
What can you do
asking-
about trading, about
the-
limiting trading?
14.3, I think.
Yeah, the whole question, what should designers consider when determining what can be traded? Any limits on trading, using trading to circumvent the game's rules, to prevent king making, the appropriate complexity of trades, how much information to limit, or whether to make trading free or have it be.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, a lot of those are what considerations goes into whether to do that or not. So the very broad question of what can we do to limit trade or to do this, you can, yeah, those are different elements that you can do to limit trade in general, but what are the considerations when you line the amount of trade that a particular account can do? Is that a solution to a botting problem? Is that a solution to there are 100,000 of this item listed on the market for less than it would be worth? Why is that? Is there any value of everyone in the game trying to list these same items that are farmed in the tutorial and nowhere else in the game and have no real use? No one wants to use them, so they just throw them out in the market. If you limit the number of trades, then you're taking one of your trade slots for that item. So if you wanted to make the tutorial items more valuable, then only those for whom that was one of their 10 slots. So someone who's early in the game, that would do something like redirect the wealth of players who needed something from the tutorial and it wasn't worth farming the tutorial. They would go buy those items from someone who is right at that point at the beginning of the game, because only then is it worth adding it to one of those 10 slots in the game. And then you would have a way of helping out new players. And maybe you could even set this as the tutorial of how do you list items, is to list that item on the market. And then those players would see that it was purchased by real players, giving you a way to get money early on. rather than everyone's listing that item. So there would be kind of what effects does that have on an economic system that might be the reason you as a designer target that as a solution. No, we didn't necessarily talk about all of those. I'm just kind of relying on can you come up with a situation or see the cause and effect in a game situation? If I wrote something like that, it would either be come up with your own or utilize one of these and talk about an existing game or make up a game of your own. Very basic couple sentence description that would utilize this concept. What would the benefits or detriments be of doing this to this system? Or when would you want to apply this particular kind of system for what benefit? I do very little regurgitation, but I talk about the idea, and then when I go write the exam, there's usually something open-ended where you want to pull from it and give an example of. As a designer, I would implement this in this situation to emphasize this, to avoid this, for this result.
Are there any chapters you suggest a part-based studying over other chapters?
Probably 13 because it has the most sub bullets.
Yeah, I made at least one question from every chapter, so I can't say something like, don't study a particular chapter, but the extent to which it appears on the exam is relatively proportional to the number of bullet points. With the floor being there is one question, at least one question on each section.
So one for trading system, one for creativity and cost curves, one for characters and builds. Probably two for combat and for
I don't know if I would make huge assumptions on exactly that, but that's,
three for economics for the other.
So
Yeah.
the prestige economy, that's like skins and.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Anything that makes you look cool, but doesn't actually affect the game. You've really seen that develop in the last 15 to 20 years. It wasn't really a thing before that, and now it's the monetization scheme of a lot of popular games, or one of multiple monetization schemes.
I know, Paleo, for example, like. If you don't pay money at all, there's like one or two choices, if I remember correctly, but then like. So you know if someone's paid money because they're like,
They look very different.
because they look very different
Mhm.
and because otherwise they're, everyone
Yeah.
looks pretty much the same.
Other questions?
How prevent gaming?
So, yeah. We'll start with what is king making? That's when someone who is not winning the game and is about to lose can do something to redistribute their resources or affect the outcome of the game that they are about to lose. If you can redirect those resources, maybe, and choose which other player gets those resources, then you can effectively decide who wins the game when it's not yourself. And that can be, there are benefits and detriments to a game that can have king making in it, but it's usually more of a detriment than a benefit because it should be the player's own play that decides who wins the game and not alliances you formed with the losing players before they lost. That seems ethically strange in some games, but maybe it makes sense in others where you really want to prioritize a diplomacy type of game. It would belong in a diplomacy type of game. But if you're not designing a game that is meant to have diplomacy as a main factor of who wins the game, then I would say any king making should be removed from the game with some kind of rule. How do you remove king making? You could just not allow a player who's about to lose the game to give up their resources. You could severely limit trade based on how close a player is to losing the game for some way, shape, or form, or put rules in place that ensure some kind of fair trade. That would say you can't give away everything, but you could strike a deal with a player to maybe give them a little bit of what they need for something that you don't need before you lose the game. There's still a little bit of king making in that idea, but at least it limits it a little bit. But what else could you come up with? How else could you prevent someone who's about to lose the game from dictating the outcome of the game more than they should with the power they have?
That varies from game to game. I mean, I don't wanna say have some sort of hard coded or hard limit on the resources they can, because that can always be min-maxed.
Yeah. Other restrictions, you can only trade on your turn.
It's not your turn.
Yeah, if it's not your turn and you're about to lose the game, then you don't have, you have the ability to give things away.
But if they see moves in advance that they're going to.
Yeah,
is
that
really
becomes the
true
challenge.
Making at that point.
Yeah,
Because
it
it still
becomes
his
tough.
agency, and to see that affected the outcome of the game, not
Right.
just him suddenly, oh, I'm about to lose, here's all this stuff.
That would be another balance issue that I would address in the game, is to say, if a player knows that they are losing turns in advance, we need a way to speed that up. Once you feel like there's no hope, to the point where you would just want to give things away and not try your best to recover from that situation, then you should have already lost the game.
You could probably make it to where trades have to go both ways, or you can't like just give
Things.
away
Yeah,
things.
no, you can still have a limited king making there, where I'll give you a little bit of this that you need for stuff that I don't need because I'm about to lose the game as a solid for something you did earlier in the game. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to come up with those exact rules, but I think there are plenty of paths of attack to a question like that, where you can create a situation where that would be an issue and then solve that issue with some mechanic in your game. What else? Did feel like an especially open-ended study guide as I was writing these questions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of open-ended here. Yeah,
So it says, what is a resource sink? Be able to give examples and define situation in particular seems to be justified.
Want to try to tackle that?
Basically, a really good one is crafting, where if you have a bunch of
Let's
resources,
start with what is a sink?
a sink is basically where you put something in. And that item, you can no longer get back out of it. It's basically a way to remove items from the game, so there's not an abundance of resources floating around in your.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever there's an offset between the amount of a resource that the game is producing and the amount of a resource that the game is removing from the economy. If there's an imbalance from that, we're producing more than we're removing, then there just becomes a huge excess. So regardless of the actual in-game value of the item, there are so many of it that it can be used so liberally that it has no value. Think of, you could always, for free, on every turn of a turn-based game, use up to 1 health potion. And it doesn't affect your movement, your attack, anything else. You just could use it for free. A way to show that there is a sink issue is if every single player in the game is walking around with 10,000 potions at any particular point in time. Yeah, I use 60 or 80 of them in a particular battle, but I mean, as a reward for that battle, I get 120 of them, so it doesn't matter. There's an imbalance between how much of it the game is producing and how much of it is needed. It would be the same if health potions dropped regularly, but the game was so easy that no one ever needed to use health potions. There are a bunch of potions floating around that no one wants. So the value of that is going to go to 0 because no one wants it. There's no value in a trade for that item. So why does it exist? Either at that point, there should be a health button that allows you to restore up to some amount of health that you can use every turn, so you don't have to keep track of what the item is. Build it into the actual mechanics of the game rather than making it an item. Or change the associated scarcity, or make those potions combine into bigger potions, or combine into random items, or they're a currency at a shop for something else. And now suddenly there are ways to remove potions from the game economy in a way that, yes, one of the potential uses for the potion is to heal you, but maybe there are some other uses for it as well. And so the value of that item will be dictated by as many different uses as it has, rather than just the one thing that it was designed for. We want to monitor the quantity of each item in something like a live service game to make sure that it's balanced around being used as much as you, the designer, want it to be used. So it should be an emergency item. It should feel like I only have 1 or 2 of these. I should save it for an emergency situation. Rather than I have 99 of them, I can use them regardless of the situation.
Sounds like Skyrim right now.
Yeah,
Oh, hang on a second, gotta hear real quick. Click, 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 click.
yeah. So
30 wheels of cheese.
some questions that I could ask about that would be something like design a situation or tell me about a situation in an existing game or invent your own situation where a resource sink is needed in the game. In this case, you could talk about something like, all right, too many health potions drop in the game. Moving on from that would be something like, all right, what is the sink? What can you do? What kinds of sinks are available? Or could you invent to remove this kind of item from the game? What would you have to consider when you make that sink? What other aspects of the game could it be affecting? That would either be a benefit to the overall health of the game economy or possibly a detriment. Because you don't want to just overreact to a single problem and shove a fix at it without thinking about how else will that affect the game? Because you don't know. You should have an idea of what's likely to happen given the testing that you've done to make sure that you're not creating more problems than you're addressing.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Let's say there's this hypothetical game that I totally don't play all the time. That has-
Certainly not Destiny 2.
that has a main resource that is used in literally everything. But I've also been at the maximum cap for that resource for like the past 4 years. Because even though it's used in everything, I always get more than I spend.
Yeah.
In like a single activity.
So from a designer's perspective, the question is, are you acting suboptimally by not spending as much of that resource? Could you be performing better by being more aggressive with your spending of that resource? Or is it balanced such that nothing you can do is optimal with that resource? You can always do something that is more valuable than spending that resource. If the designer can decide that it is the player's fault for not doing this, then it's not a problem. But the question is this problem for you a problem that a newer player has? Is it a problem that a very aggressive spending player has been playing for a while has? If you start to see that it's a pattern across your entire player base, now you start to ask the question of, is this dropping too much? Do I need to add a better sink for this? Something that takes more and more of that currency for maybe a large scale benefit to give people a reason to collect it and then spend it all in one go. Do I turn this resource into having other additional uses? Do I turn this resource into, what else could we do? Increase the amount of it that is used in spending, decrease the amount of it that is dropped. Make it useful for other things so that you have to consider and make choices about what to spend it on. Or maybe even give some value or get you a different or more kind of value if you gift some of it per day to a newer player. Maybe that helps their retention rates to put in a system like that. So as a designer, you have quite a few things you can do about that. But yeah, if it's a design problem, it should be rectified as a design problem.
One solution is that in DMC5, one weapon for a specific character uses the main game's currency as part of its cost to use it. You're literally throwing your money at them to kill them, and that is a fun mechanic they could potentially do as well.
Or like the magic armor from Zelda.
Is it possible that it could be like the player's fault, but at the same time, it also be like, but also a pattern?
Yes,
And just people
that's
don't
likely a game
understand.
communication issue.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if the player doesn't know that they can spend the resource for this benefit, and that's across a number of players, then it's going to look like supply is high and demand is low, when really there's just an underutilized mechanic in the game that players are aware of. So you always have to, as a designer, ask yourself, why? Why is this behavior that we're seeing happening? Is it a result of my own failure? Is it a result of the game systems interacting? Is it a result of the invisible hand driving the market to an equilibrium that isn't what I expected it to be? Knows.
Sometimes I wonder why it's still in the game.
Yeah,
Because the designers have started adding other material costs to each thing you can purchase. And I think the only thing you can purchase with that material on is like quests. Or bound.
Games that have been around for a long time, live service games, end up with feature bloat like that, where it's gonna take real worker hours to remove that feature from the game for no added benefit to the actual gameplay. And if you're in a constant crunch for new content to what's gonna retain your players, streamlining the existing system or adding new features. If you have to choose between those two, adding new features will draw more players. Get your old players who have quit to come back and play it again or are taking a break. It is work to remove old things and streamline them. And it's not focused on enough, but that's usually due to not enough developers and the associated cost with it.
Somebody should tell that to Bungie, considering all the stuff they've yanked out of Destiny 2.
It's very frustrating. You can't play the original story that the game launched with.
Yeah, I do remember reading about that.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I don't even know Destiny 2 had a story.
Yeah, it used to, it still does. They're coming out with another one, July, we'll see if the game dies though. What's your favorite type of option? Just out of the different types.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that really depends on the system that's in place. Certain auctions will make a lot more sense in a certain situation, and I don't know if there is one that fits all or even most situations. I think the most important questions you can ask from that is, who is the player? How do you turn the auction into a story or into something that is engaging from that player's perspective? So is the player a buyer? Is the player a seller? Figure that out, or do they go back and forth between the two? You should design from the player's perspective. If the player is always a buyer, then really put focus on the actual second to second, when do you bid? What do you bid? Make sure that the user interface is about that and make sure that the player is given enough time to, if they want to bid, place a bid. If you're the seller, on the other hand, you want that auction to be over with probably faster because the user doesn't have input in between every bid.
Smart money.
Right, so you want to design around that. But the actual mechanics of the auction, it will come down to, are you trying to maximize the value that the seller gets out of the auction? Are you trying to maximize the likelihood that the item gets sold? There are different design features for whatever subset that you might want to design. So be ready for either some kind of scenario where you need to pick the auction mechanics, or to be able to come up with your own situation that maps to a particular auction type, that makes use of a particular auction type. So I'd give you the auction type, you design mechanics around when is that particular auction type going to be useful? And is it going to create the most drama for the user?
More of a melee or ranged player.
Range is always the most optimal.
It's something that I've learned over many, many, many games. I think naturally, I'm a melee player. That's what I want to do. But in most games, I will play ranged because it's just better.
Unless there's cool magic and I can have minions. That's my favorite.
I do like minions. I like a passive play style or a defensive play style.
I'm bad with ring.
Minions, awesome. Just sending 3,000 trash mobs, the other enemies have to be.
Right.
I want to be the final boss.
How do you like having a bunch of trash mobs thrown at you? It's not fun, is it?
So I think that punching something is so much easier than having to aim and.
Yeah, I do like that.
You just throw AoEs out.
Okay, well, that's
Fireball, fireball, fireball.
explosion.
Precisely, you just throw a bunch of AoEs out. It's ranged. I'm throwing about 3 million damage from half a continent away, but it's ranged.
Do you have any examples of the invisible hand that kind of make more sense?
So anytime where you have any difference between supply and demand, the invisible hand is the pressure that's going to bring you back toward equilibrium. So just finding any situation in a game where there would be difference between that. So you're gonna use the concept of marginal supply and marginal demand to say that there is an imbalance. That imbalance is going to move us toward an equilibrium. And that equilibrium space will narrow and narrow and narrow until it reaches that point. Whenever some expansion comes about that changes drastically, either the demand or the supply or both of something, the invisible hand will move it into the new equilibrium. Without your having to design anything that does this, it happens naturally. It happens by default. You don't set what the market price is supposed to be. You don't set that there's going to be a market price. There's no part of your design that does that. It just is something that happens in every market. Supply and demand take over, and there is a natural equilibrium that will be found.
Whether the players have information about rarity and such or not.
Correct. Does not matter what is published or what is done.
And in either way, it's gonna end up at the same equilibrium probably.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If players know the associated rarity, maybe you get more people who think that they're going to be able to make more profit off of the rarest stuff. So you might get something like an over farming of the rarest gear, which creates more supply, which drives down the price, and everything less than that they would have been farming that's actually more profitable. There'd be more of a distance between. But then someone's going to go try to find what are the most profitable. So there'll be people working on every part of that, but it might be a slightly different version of that, depending on whether information is public or not.
You have a question. When can you start with an existing cost curve and when should you make your own cost?
Yeah,
From reading the slides. You've never directly answered that, but my guess is you should make a new one if you're making a new game. And you should use an existing one if you're making like DLC or a sequel.
at a high level, yes. But even if you're making a new game, if it's based on mechanics from other games, you can start to think about or borrow cost curves or starting cost curves from other games that you've made, other games that are on the market that are similar to the genre that you are. Think about something like using K-nearest neighbors to find the games that are closest to you and say, what did they do? What were their cost curves? Even if you have estimates of their cost curves, there's a reason that their game was successful with the mechanics and balance that it had. Even if you're not doing exactly that, it gets you close enough to a good answer to at least start playtesting and determining what are the issues in my game if I start at where that game was. There's less to learn.
It's either like. If it's not a game that's ever been done.
Yeah, if it's completely novel, then there's not a lot of prior information that you can use. Or if it is so different from something else in the genre that it warrants a complete reevaluation of the cost curve. But usually there is some place that you can start that is close enough that it will get you better data than if you designed your own from scratch with no other information.
Back to the invisible hand, I just wanted to confirm, so is it like an inherent market force or is it something that you
Yeah.
design and eventually?
It's an inherent market force. It's something that you can't really control, but you also don't need to implement anything to get that behavior. It's just usually always the desired behavior. There is an equilibrium, and regardless of what you do, you're going to move toward whatever equilibrium that is, or if it creates a new equilibrium, it'll move toward that equilibrium. Maybe you can get a sense of from people who feels ready and who feels like they don't know what to ask. Sense of just ready and you don't really have much of what you can ask at the moment. Don't know what to ask. Yeah. So for those who don't really know what to ask, maybe is there any can anyone give some information about what what you feel like the roadblocks are, or what maybe I can tackle just a process or.
The last few weeks, it felt like a blur.
Yes.
That's fair.
It felt just. I guess just like work and they sort of blend together, it's like, wait, when did I do this? I thought that was this day that I did that.
You know, it's a problem when I start forgetting what the date is.
This is Saturday, I'm pretty sure.
Then what the heck am I doing here?
Exactly.
I could have slept in.
That's to be please.
Okay, this isn't really a question about tests, but is there class Monday?
I am required to hold a class on Monday. I will make this
It's
as
free.
open-ended and optional as I possibly can. So if you have anything that you would prefer to prioritize about next week, be they finals and other classes or work or projects that don't feel like you need to be in attendance or attend remotely. That said, I will do something that is reasonably open-ended. It could be something like going over job interviewing and preparation. It could be something like talking about what courses we should take or people should take or prioritize. How do you get ready for industry? Anything that you think could be useful and relevant as a discussion point.
How about harmony?
Yeah. Neighbor.
Yeah, we can also work on that.
POV build guides, yes.
Probably
What
not.
balancing didn't work. Can we just write about how
Yeah.
it would work and what we do?
Yeah, analyze the
Okay.
weaknesses of basically what happened. What did you think was going to happen? What happened to the best of your understanding? Why is there a difference there? If you were to go back and iterate again, what would you do differently, or what would you do
I
to
think
try
I swung the
to?
pendulum up too far the other way. I think deck D is now the best.
Yeah. Yeah. It's worth analyzing the magnitude of the changes that you made, and if you went from one extreme behavior to another extreme behavior. Do you think that meeting in the middle would solve that issue, or do you think that there was an inherent assumption that you made about the state of the game that was part of that swing? And as long as you make that assumption, even if you only make half of that assumption, it still swings way out here. So just analyzing at a level of depth. I'm not going to be able to tell you whether your answers are right or wrong. It's just a matter of, are your justifications and plans, do I buy those? If you did that, would you be collecting interesting and relevant data? That's really the question that I'm going to be asking.
Think I'm happy with my total benefit equation, and I'm ready to start balancing the cards. We'll see, I changed it like 6 times in this morning.
Yeah, I like Monday as a potential harmony day as well. So feel free to come in and collect some additional data. I'm hoping that by Monday that you're at least have some writing underway. If you're at that point where maybe you have done some stuff, but you need to do some further play testing, get your writing at a point where you're caught up to the work that you've done. And then the last couple of days before it is due, then we can work on getting that last bit of data, and then you have less to write and less to remember about where you were. Be as prepared as you can if you're planning to come in on Monday and gather more data.
As long as it seems fair, and that there's a chance that everyone can win, sounds good to me.
Yeah. Yeah, really, it's just an analysis task. I know I've said this so many times. I am not looking for perfection here. I'm not sure perfection is possible here.
This isn't Wizards of the Coast, everything doesn't have to be perfect.
That was certainly not perfect. It's Wizards of the Coast. The best people in the world when a game as complex as Magic the Gathering are not capable of perfect balance.
Looking at you, the decks, looking at you.
You gotta love it when that premise of their whole deck is just, you can't play. I'm gonna do this, no, you're not. Okay, then I'll do this, no, you're not. Cool.
Why, no, you know, I now get to do this, but I activate this, but my activation activates the thing.
Other questions? Anything last minute? How do we best make use of the last few minutes of class before we come in and take an exam tomorrow?
Qualify blue deck players as part of cancel culture. if that's all.
I mean, it would be more cancer culture, but
I mean. Potato, you know?
no, I actually really like playing this. Makes me think.
So now that you've taught this class, are you gonna change anything for next time?
Yes.
Devastation.
That's always the case when you teach something for the first time. You always, there's a significant revision process from A to B.
I
And
mean,
it
guys, you're
starts to
making it
be-
easier.
I want to change up the length of the first exam for sure. I'll throw those questions in a question bank, but I know that exam was too long. I am especially open to other people's feedback as well, because I get a sense of, here's what we did. Here's what I'm planning to do next quarter, trying to help prepare people for that, as well as make this valuable to people who aren't planning to go into game design for a career. But I'm also not a student. So I am in a huge data gathering mode for the course. So if you'd like to have a discussion with me, obviously anything that you would like to remain confidential, put it in the course evaluations. But yes, please do fill out those course evaluations, super useful to me. But I also would love to have a conversation with you just to get a sense of what your experience was like. My goal in that is not to tell you you're right or you're wrong, it's just to gather data. And that means that any opinion that you have about it is valid by the nature of you took the class and had that opinion. I will collect that data and decide, do I make changes based off of that opinion? How commonly did I see that as an issue? And that will be part of that process. So I hope that people feel comfortable enough with me to open up about your experience and anything that you think could be improved. But yeah, that becomes part of my process.
One thing to note is that like the Unity book that we used. Well, I don't think the book was bad, but I run.
Need a bit.
He's a Mac user and it drives me insane because he does a bunch of things that are specific to Macs.
I'm not a Mac user.
No, the author of the book.
Oh.
Oh, I didn't run into that problem at all.
Well, yeah, but also, well, I'm a Linux user, and while modern versions of Unity work pretty well on Unix. Support for older version on Linux, supports for older version of Unity. Straight up, like. Any like versions below, like I think 2020 Unity 2023 are straight up broken on Linux plus Wayland.
Yeah,
And
multiple
so
people
I
in this class have
basically-
had those issues.
Yeah, like, I think like on about over the first half of the assignments. Like for the issue section, I basically said, hey, I ran into this thing that straight up does not work for this version of Linux, I have to bump to 2021, then 2022, then 2023, and so.
I surprisingly, like, at some point, finally managed to work out like all the issues I was having. Even with the 2020 version.
Really?
It's just a lot of work on Linux, I think.
One thing I thought is like, some chapters would have been like
But that
not
was-
separated, that would have been better done together.
Closer together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I use Unity like 6, and Unity 6 on Linux with Wayland just works perfectly fine. Are you using Wayland or X11?
Wayland,
Oh, really? Huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
you,
like-
you two should talk about how you've managed it. I think there'd be a lot that you could learn from each other.
Just works perfectly fine, no issues
We're
whatsoever.
skipping some of
Yeah,
the too for the assignments, like the how to code ones.
It's a little bit of intro to C#, for
But I
those who haven't
did
seen
fix
C#.
like everything and it was working just fine.
Huh.
But once I,
Yeah,
once
So-
I fixed all those issues.
I am very much waiting for a new version of that book because I do recognize that it's a bit out of date at this point. And I scoured the internet to see if a new edition was going to be published or was in the works, and I could get no information on that. So if that remains an issue, I will start scouring around for new books that I can use that might be a bit less painful to use
You know what it sounds like, time to write your own.
if needed.
One thing I did run into, and I don't think I was the only one to run into this, but I don't know how many people were. The files that he wants us to use for some of the assets for some of the activities are like hidden on an obscure, really
Yes.
sketchy looking website.
Yes,
And it's like the link to it is buried in.
Yes, I posted that the very first week, because I ran
Yeah.
into the exact same problem. It's at the introduction of the book and never mentioned anywhere else.
So feel free to stop by, give me some feedback on that.
And the badly formatted code. And not only badly formatted, but like inconsistent on like syntax.
Yeah.
Anything that I try to have everyone do together are gonna have some issues because we're gonna be using different operating systems, different syntax styles, and granted, it should be consistent. But yeah, there's
Those very much should have been consistent.
most
They're
books
not-
that I've seen are significantly worse than this,
there are
significantly.
specific, like. For C#, there are specific best practices that they were not following.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't, depending on the.
What I found worked was that I just didn't bother with like copying and pasting them from the book. I went into like. Cause in the solution, in like on like the sketchy site they have, you can find like all the completed projects. So I just went into those and copied the C# files instead of bothering to actually like type them in manually, and it worked a lot,
I always type them in manually because I wanted to, get a better sense of like.
Actually, you can't the words.
And then. And then anything that I didn't like about their system,
I think at one point he just like brackets started appearing in some of the closed statements.
Alright, we are out of time.
For the absolute just big bang.
Yeah.
that he
Have a good
was
day,
from.
Yeah, you too, thanks, Gunnar.
Was a big problem.
I also just got your feedback, Leo, thanks, that's good to know.
Now write all of these different files.
I'll take that
And
into
then test
consideration.
them in the game, so testing each piece, they were
Oh, yeah.
for each